As the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey of the coronation ceremony, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes.
The room had survived arguments, betrayals, and years of carefully concealed resentment. But no one was prepared for Camilla to turn her anger toward the youngest child standing before her. Prince Louis froze. Catherine moved instantly. William's expression hardened. Then Charles rose from his chair with such force that the conversation died in a single breath. What followed was not a measured royal correction. It was a father, grandfather, and king finally losing control. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned the family to Windsor Castle for a private rehearsal before a major royal ceremony. Windsor Castle, one of the monarch's principal residences, often serves as both a family home and a formal setting for official duties. The meeting was meant to settle protocol, meaning the rules that guide royal conduct, seating, timing, and public behavior. Instead, every old grievance entered the room with them. Louis shifted in his chair as the discussion dragged on. He whispered to Catherine, swung one foot beneath the table, and looked toward the door. The child was restless, not rebellious. Yet Camilla had already watched William and his wife gain greater influence over palace decisions, and she saw the boy's innocent movement as another sign that her authority was being ignored. Camilla suddenly reached across, seized Prince Louis by the arm, and pulled him back toward his place. She reprimanded him sharply, then accused Catherine of allowing her son to embarrass the crown. The crown, in this context, meant the monarchy as an institution, not merely the object worn at a coronation. Several senior household officials heard every word, and the humiliation struck Catherine before the shock had time to fade. Catherine pulled Louis away at once, and dropped beside him as tears gathered in his eyes. Her voice stayed low, but fury tightened every word. William moved between the queen consort and his family, warning her that no rank gave anyone permission to frighten his child. Louis reached for his father's hand while his mother held his shoulder. Charles then noticed the red marks beneath the boy's sleeve. The king surged upward, knocking his chair backward, and demanded that Camilla release him. She refused to retreat. Someone, she said, had to teach William's children discipline. Silence followed. No one dared move as the locks clicked. Then Charles ordered the doors closed and told every aide to leave. The attack had lasted seconds, but behind it stood years of rivalry, resentment, and fear. What the monarch said next would reveal how deeply the family had already begun to break. Louis did not understand titles, succession, or the silent war being fought around him. He only understood that an adult had frightened him, and that his mother's arms suddenly felt like the safest place in the world. Yet for William, Catherine, Charles, and Camilla, the boy's tears carried a devastating meaning. Each adult saw something different in that moment. A boundary crossed, an authority challenged, a family endangered, or a position slipping away. Catherine carried Prince Louis into the adjoining room and shut the door. The Princess of Wales, the title given to the wife of the heir to the throne, was trained to remain composed under pressure. But this was not a ceremony, and he was not a symbol. He was her frightened son. She wiped his cheeks, checked his arm, and asked whether it hurt. Louis shook his head, then whispered that he had only wanted to leave the table. His confusion cut deeper than any accusation. Catherine told him he had done nothing wrong, yet guilt pressed against her anger because the attack had happened steps away. She had protected him, but not quickly enough to stop fear entering his voice. William stood outside, breathing slowly. The future king wanted to return and confront Camilla immediately, but one reckless sentence could turn a family crisis into a constitutional one. Succession, the legal order determining who inherits the throne, placed pressure on his family. He and Catherine were expected to model restraint, but their first duty was to keep George, Charlotte, and Louis from becoming weapons in palace rivalries. Charles remained near the overturned chair, staring toward the closed door. Seeing his grandson frightened dragged him back to years when William and Harry had been trapped inside adult conflict. The king remembered moments when silence had felt easier than intervention. Now that old failure stood before him, and his rage was aimed as much at himself as at the queen consort. Camilla held her ground, but fear moved beneath her defiance. Catherine's popularity, William's growing authority, and the children's future roles had narrowed the space she believed was hers. Her attack on Louis had exposed the insecurity she had hidden behind discipline. Charles approached the adjoining room and raised his hand to knock. Then he heard Louis ask why the Queen was angry with him. The monarch lowered his hand and stood frozen. William returned moments later. His voice was controlled, but his demand was absolute. Camilla would no longer have unrestricted access to his children. To understand why she reacted with such bitterness, the family would have to confront the moment irritation became hostility, and when Louis became part of a larger battle. The Windsor confrontation did not begin at Windsor. Its true beginning came 3 weeks earlier, inside a chapel filled with senior royals, advisors, and arranged symbols of succession. One unscripted gesture from Prince Louis delighted Charles, moved Catherine, and drew an approving smile from William. Camilla, however, saw something entirely different. To her, that small moment proved that the future of the monarchy was advancing without her, and that she was losing control of the present. Catherine had become more visible during Charles's demanding schedule, accepting duties once handled by older members of the family. William had also drawn firmer boundaries around his children. The Wales household, meaning the family and staff supporting the Prince and Princess of Wales, now controlled decisions involving George, Charlotte, and Louis. Camilla read every boundary as exclusion. Tension sharpened at St. George's Chapel, a royal church inside Windsor Castle, used for ceremonies and family services. During a private rehearsal, Louis slipped from his assigned place and walked toward Charles. The boy carried a paper crown he had made himself. He held it up and asked his grandfather to wear it. Charles laughed. He bent down, accepted the crown, and placed it over his ceremonial cap. William smiled. Catherine pressed her lips together, moved, while the officials around them relaxed. For one brief moment, duty gave way to affection, and the king looked less like a monarch than a delighted grandfather. Camilla did not share their warmth. Afterward, she pulled Catherine aside and said Louis had damaged the dignity of the rehearsal. The princess answered calmly that he was 6 years old, and that affection should never be treated as disobedience. That measured reply cut deeper than anger. The queen consort heard it as a public correction from the woman she feared was replacing her influence. Camilla later learned through a documented household note that Charles had ordered the paper crown preserved inside his desk. She stared at the written instruction, then folded it once. To her, the object became proof that his emotional loyalty was shifting toward William's family. Camilla confronted William in a private corridor and told him his children must learn where affection ended and duty began. He answered that no one would use duty to intimidate them. Then he closed the door between them. Camilla soon requested greater authority over the children at formal events. Charles neither approved nor clearly rejected it. His silence created the space she later used against Louis. The paper crown had once made Charles smile, but now it stood at the center of a rupture no closed door could contain. At Windsor, William would force his father to answer for that silence. When William returned to the chamber, he did not sit down. Catherine remained with Louis, and the empty chair beside the prince became a silent accusation. Charles demanded an apology. Camilla refused. Then William placed both hands on the table and spoke with a calmness more dangerous than shouting. The argument was no longer about one child's behavior. It was about whether rank gave anyone the right to cross a parent's final boundary. Charles stood beside the displaced chair, while Camilla remained rigid near the fireplace. The king had ordered aides from the room, leaving no courtier to soften what came next. An official rehearsal, a formal practice for a royal ceremony, had become the setting for a family rupture because the queen consort had used physical force and attacked Catherine's parenting before senior staff. William positioned himself between Camilla and the adjoining door. He told her she would never touch Prince Louis again. She tried to interrupt, but the future king repeated the warning without raising his voice. That restraint made every word heavier. He was not debating etiquette. He was defending his son. Camilla insisted she had corrected unacceptable conduct and accused the family of turning discipline into scandal. Charles demanded that she apologize to Louis and his parents. When she called their reaction excessive, the monarch struck his palm against the table. Frightening a child, he said, was not royal discipline. Camilla turned toward the adjoining room as though she intended to confront Catherine. William stepped into her path. Charles pointed toward the chair and ordered his wife to remain where she was until the princess decided Louis was ready to see her. Camilla's composure cracked. She accused William of engineering the confrontation to drive her from the family's inner circle, the small group trusted with private royal decisions. The prince answered that her own actions had achieved what no rival could have done. Charles then revealed the truth in a recorded household account prepared after the meeting. He had never granted Camilla authority to discipline the Wales children. William forced his father to admit that his earlier silence had created dangerous ambiguity, meaning uncertainty about who truly held control. The admission landed like another blow. Catherine entered without Louis. She faced Camilla and said her son had asked whether he had done something bad enough to deserve being grabbed. For the first time, the queen consort had no answer. William demanded immediate safeguards, including an end to her unsupervised access to the children. The shouting stopped, but the battle deepened. Only Charles could turn that demand into an irreversible royal order, and his decision would wound either his marriage or his grandson. Charles had spent a lifetime preparing to exercise power, yet the most painful decision of his reign arrived without ministers, red boxes, or constitutional ceremony. His grandson was crying behind a closed door. His son was demanding protection. His wife believed her position was under attack. Every path carried a personal cost. But when the king finally picked up his pen, the decision he made revealed which relationship he was willing to wound, and which boundary he would defend without compromise. Charles entered his study alone and closed the door behind him. As sovereign, the person who formally serves as Britain's head of state, he controlled household access, ceremonial participation, private invitations, and conduct inside royal residences. Those powers now carried a brutal purpose. He had to protect Louis without allowing the family rupture to damage the engagements already placing William, Catherine, Camilla, and himself before the public. Silence pressed against him. Charles opened the short account written by the equerry, who had witnessed the confrontation. An equerry is a senior aide who assists a royal figure with official and personal duties. The documented statement described the grab, Catherine's reaction, William's warning, and Camilla's refusal to apologize. The king removed his glasses and set the paper down. Charles felt betrayed by his wife's refusal to understand the harm she had caused. He also felt ashamed. His own unclear boundaries had allowed Camilla to believe she could overrule William and Catherine where their children were concerned. That failure belonged to him. For the first time, authority demanded that he act as a grandfather before acting as husband. Camilla entered without waiting to be invited. She told Charles that surrendering to William's demands would strip away her influence and leave her powerless inside the family. The monarch answered that the decision was not about her status. It was about Louis's safety. She heard the words as abandonment. Charles drafted the order himself. Camilla would withdraw from every rehearsal and private event involving the Wales children. Any future contact would happen only with William or Catherine present. He also demanded a review of every informal role she had assumed over family protocol, threatening the network of influence she had quietly built. Charles signed the instruction and turned the page toward her. Camilla reached for it, stopped, and asked whether he had already chosen William over her. The king did not hesitate. He had chosen the child she frightened. The order reached the household within the hour. The ink had barely dried when doors, chairs, and invitations began shifting around Camilla, making her new reality impossible to deny, and her first response ensured the fallout would not remain inside that study. By the following morning, nothing had been publicly announced, yet Camilla could see the punishment everywhere. Her place at the children's rehearsal was empty. Her briefing folder had been reduced. An equerry who once waited for her instructions now referred questions directly to William's office. The queen consort had not lost her title, but she had lost something she valued almost as deeply: unquestioned access. For the first time, the palace was moving around her rather than through her. Camilla entered the rehearsal chamber expecting tension. Instead, she found absence. Her name card had vanished from the table, and Catherine's folder rested beside Charles's. The king's instruction had removed her from discussions involving George, Charlotte, and Louis, while access to the children's private Windsor rooms now required parental approval. Palace staff called these safeguards, meaning protective rules designed to prevent further harm. But everyone understood the deeper truth. Her informal authority had been cut away. Camilla asked an aide where she was expected to sit. He answered carefully that Charles had reassigned her to a separate briefing later that afternoon. The words were polite. The humiliation was not. Catherine had taken no title from her, yet the princess now occupied the emotional space she had feared losing. William faced pressure from courtiers, who worried that the restrictions would fuel public suspicion. Courtiers are senior members of the royal household who advise and support the family. He refused to bend. Speaking privately with Catherine, the prince said protecting Louis could not become negotiable simply because enforcement made others uncomfortable. She agreed, though the cost of the fracture still weighed heavily on them both. A senior household officer then confirmed through the equerry's written account that the record included Camilla's physical grab, her accusation against Catherine, and her refusal to apologize. The document meant she could never recast the incident as a misunderstanding. Charles deepened the blow by canceling their next joint appearance and ordering separate schedules. The monarch was prepared to absorb public speculation rather than pretend their marriage remained untouched. For Camilla, that choice felt colder than any shouted accusation and far more permanent than anger could be. Camilla returned alone to her sitting room. She removed a bracelet, placed it sharply on the dressing table, and stared at the faint mark around her wrist. William had finally achieved what he wanted, she whispered. Yet even she knew his victory had begun with her own hand on Louis's arm. Then the stalemate shifted. Louis asked to see his grandfather privately. Camilla believed power had shaped the decision, but the turning point would come from the one person in the crisis who possessed none at all. Louis entered the room holding Catherine's hand, but he asked to speak to Charles alone. For a moment William hesitated. Then the door closed, leaving a king and his grandson without courtiers, cameras, or prepared language. Louis did not demand punishment. He asked one question. Was Grandpapa still angry with him? The innocence of those words broke through every layer of pride surrounding the crisis, and forced Charles to confront what the child had carried away from Windsor. Catherine released Louis's hand only after he nodded. William remained beside her in the corridor, uneasy but silent, while the boy entered Charles's smaller Windsor sitting room. The meeting mattered because every adult had argued about access, authority, and protocol, the formal rules guiding royal conduct. Louis had understood none of that. He had simply decided the anger was his fault. Louis placed a second paper crown on the table and told Charles he was sorry for disrupting the rehearsal. The king moved at once. He lowered himself until they were eye to eye, then told his grandson that no child should apologize for being frightened by an adult's anger. Charles spoke slowly, because the next truth had to be clear. Louis had done nothing deserving fear. Louis looked down and asked whether Camilla disliked him. The question shook Charles more deeply than William's accusations had. He refused to excuse his wife, but he would not force a child to carry the weight of a broken marriage or a palace struggle. The grandfather promised that no one in the family would grab him or frighten him again. Louis left the room calmer, returning to Catherine's side as William entered. Charles told his son that the restrictions on Camilla would remain until she offered a sincere apology without excuses. The safeguards were no longer a temporary response to pressure. They had become a fixed condition. William asked whether his father truly meant it. Charles picked up the new paper crown and placed it beside the earlier one preserved on his desk. He admitted that the boundary should have been drawn before Louis was hurt, not after. William's anger did not vanish. Yet something changed when Charles accepted responsibility without defending himself. Father and son acknowledged that years of tension had reached the children because both men had allowed resentment to grow too close to family life. Inside Windsor, a grandfather's promise began healing the fracture. Outside the gates, however, Camilla's absence from the rehearsal had already been noticed. One front page was about to transform a private wound into a national judgment, forcing the country to decide who had failed Louis and who had finally protected him at last. The palace released no explanation, yet absence became its own announcement. Camilla vanished from a major family rehearsal. William and Catherine arrived with all three children. Charles remained unusually close to Louis throughout the appearance. Then one photograph captured the entire crisis without revealing a single private word. The king bending toward his grandson, William watching protectively, and Catherine holding the boy's hand. By sunrise, that image had become a public verdict on the family drama hidden behind Windsor's walls. Questions spread before the family had even left. The palace offered only a brief statement about revised engagements, meaning official royal appearances that had been changed or reassigned. That careful wording satisfied no one. Commentators immediately noticed Catherine standing closer to Charles, William remaining beside the children, and Louis receiving unusually direct reassurance from his grandfather. The chronicle turned suspicion into national drama. Its front page carried a full-width photograph of Charles crouching beside Louis, beneath the headline, "The King Stands with His Grandson." The newspaper did not explain the private confrontation, yet the image gave the public a story of protection, regret, and a child caught inside an adult struggle. Crowds gathered near the long walk outside Windsor Castle, the broad ceremonial avenue leading toward the royal residence. Families brought handmade cards addressed to Louis. One young child stepped forward and left a paper crown at the gate, unknowingly repeating the symbol that had first deepened Camilla's resentment. Charles received praise for drawing a firm line, but criticism followed too. Supporters asked why the king had waited until Louis was frightened before acting. Public sympathy remained strongest for the boy and Catherine, whose protective response had become central to the story. A national broadcaster then reported, through a documented palace scheduling note, that Camilla had been removed from private engagements involving the Wales children. The palace refused further details, but the wording confirmed that her absence was deliberate, not accidental. Camilla watched the coverage alone. When the paper crown appeared on the screen, her anger finally collapsed into grief. The symbol reduced the entire scandal to one painful contrast: a child's innocence against an adult's pride. She turned off the television, opened a drawer, and removed a sheet of personal stationery. Camilla began writing directly to Louis. For the first time, she mentioned no discipline, rank, William, or Catherine. Every sentence forced her to face the harm she had defended, and every erased word stripped away an excuse she trusted. The letter would bring them together one final time. The nation had reached its conclusion, but the family's verdict depended on whether Camilla could finally say the words she had resisted from the beginning. There would be no grand ceremony, no public confession, and no staged display of unity. The final reckoning took place in a Windsor room with Charles, William, Catherine, Camilla, and Louis present. The Queen Consort held a letter, but the most important words were not on the page. They were the words she had refused to speak from the beginning. Her title could protect her position. It could not protect her from the truth of what she had done. William and Catherine brought Louis only after he said he felt ready. Charles made one thing clear: the meeting was about accountability, not appearances. Accountability meant accepting responsibility without hiding behind rank, duty, or intention. Camilla would not regain unrestricted access merely because she apologized. Trust would have to return slowly, through patience and respect for the children's parents. Camilla sat across from Louis and placed the letter aside. She told him directly that grabbing his arm and frightening him had been wrong. He had not caused her anger. He had not deserved what happened. The Queen Consort offered no defense and asked for no immediate forgiveness. Louis listened, then looked toward Catherine. His mother gave him space to decide. The boy accepted the apology. Catherine thanked him for being brave, but she did not ask him to hug Camilla or pretend the fear had disappeared. William spoke next. He told Camilla that her apology mattered, yet the safeguards would remain. She accepted the condition without argument. The future king understood that authority could not be restored by words alone, and she finally understood that trust could not be commanded after it had been broken. Charles faced the family and admitted his failure. The king had allowed uncertainty around Camilla's role, and waited too long to draw boundaries that should always have been clear. His silence had created room for harm. Camilla remained queen consort, and continued her duties, but she permanently lost any independent role in directing George, Charlotte, or Louis. Every decision involving the children now belonged to William and Catherine. Charles placed the two paper crowns into Louis's hands. One carried the innocence of the chapel. The other carried the promise made after the crisis. Kindness, the grandfather told him, held more dignity than fear ever could. The day Charles lost control was remembered not for the volume of his anger, but for the boundary it finally created. A frightened child was protected. A dangerous silence was broken. And the crown learned that respect survives only when compassion is defended. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.